Welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast with the legendino Tim Vickery all the way in Rio, but dreaming, Tim, of a time when England recreated the game or reimagined the game that is football.
Here I am in a tropical sunshine, dreaming of a bitterly cold night in Madrid on the 8th of December 1965. I see this a little bit as part two of a trilogy. Remember, the first one of these that we ever did was England winning the World Cup in 1966.
Yes, it was
So
brilliant. Yeah,
that's the when Chris Farlow was number one with Baby, 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 You're Out of Time.
that's right. Good memory.
Yeah.
Given that you were like a year old at the time,
yeah,
it's not a bad memory, you know?
Yeah, I was a year and 2 months, and those 2 months made all the difference. So that's the concluding part of the trilogy. And then another one we looked at a while back was England on tour here in Rio in '64, where they got beat by both Brazil and Argentina. And the manager, Alf Ramsey, thought it's the moment when he thinks, no, we're too open. He was playing 4-2-4 with two wingers. No, we're too open. That's not the direction that football's going. We need to Archie Bell and the Drells, man. We need to tighten up. And this is the moment. This game against Spain is the moment where he finds his form. And let's remember, Spain are the reigning European champions. This is a big game. England have never won in Spain, and they are the reigning European champions. A lot of the team there, and the coach Villalonga, was the coach when Real Madrid won the first versions of the European Cup. So there's real pedigree here in the Spanish side. And what happens on 8th of December 1965 is an absolute massacre. I'm going to read you what Bobby Charlton left us, some of the greatest autobiographical football books I've ever read. There's one called My Manchester United Years and one called My England Years. And I think he did really well to separate the two. And it's exactly as you'd expect from Charlton. It's not a rush job. You're getting deep, considered opinions. And this is what he says about, and it's really poetic, I think. He says, there's a vital difference between hoping to do something and then knowing with deep certainty that it's within your reach. Everything changes when suddenly you believe you've been given the means and shown the way. This happened on the icy cold night of 8th December 1965 in the Bernabeu in Madrid. This is the moment where winning the World Cup for England becomes very, very much a possibility, because Ramsey has thought, how am I going to get this team compact? How am I going to get this team available, able to defend against the best in the world, but also with enough possession to do something? And this is the game when he drops the wingers. There's no wingers here. Essentially what he does, and he unleashes this scheme on the world in this game, it's the World Cup team. There's only two changes between this team, the team that plays tonight, and the team that won the World Cup. It's George Eastham on the left side of midfield and Joe Baker up front. Arsenal pair are replaced by Martin Peters and Jeff Hurst of West Ham. But this is the system, no wingers, and it leaves England with the extra man in midfield. Another a bit that Charlton quotes from the sports writer Desmond Hackett. Now, I'm just old enough to... Desmond Hackett was a big figure. I'm just old enough to remember when people referred to a jacket as a Desmond. That's a nice Desmond you got there. Based on... And what Desmond Hackett wrote, he said this is he wrote the night of the game. This was England's first win in Spain, but it was more than a victory. It was a thrashing of painful humiliation for the Spanish. Gone were the shackles of rigid regimentation. The team moved freely and confidently, and with such rare imagination that the numbers on their backs became mere identification marks on players who rose to noble heights. England's football was as smooth as the brush of a master, precise, balanced, and as lovely to watch as the ballet. And as Charlton said, Bobby Charlton says, footballers go through their entire lives without getting a review like that. But how was this possible? Because dropping the wingers, he's got more men in midfield. So they've always got the extra man. And the Spanish fullbacks, the pair of fullbacks, spend the whole game thinking, what am I going to do? What I've got nothing to do. Who am I going to mark? I don't know what to do, because England have the extra man in midfield, so they can always find the pass and always keep the ball. And then, and this was vital to the way that Ramsey thought. Ramsey, remember, was himself a constructive fullback. He wasn't quick, but he was very, very good on the ball. And both of the goals in this game, it was 2-0, but it could easily have been 6. It was a massacre of those proportions. Both of the goals of these games have featured of fullbacks coming up, and there's an element of surprise. There's no one to mark them. So almost bizarrely, and I think in cultural and musical terms, this applies as well. We'll get to that in a minute. England is leading the pack. Somehow England, a country that it's not an ideological country. Ramsey is a firm pragmatist, but somehow in his own little, we'll try this and then we'll try that, he's arrived at a system which is ahead of the pack. This new system, 4-4-2. Charlton himself refers to it as 4-3-3 because he considers himself part of the forward line, because he's so free now that he's got the protection of these players behind him. He's got Nobby Stiles, he's got Alan Ball, and George Eastham as well. He feels so protected that he sees it as a 4-3-3 rather than a 4-4-2. But in its kind of pragmatic way, Alf Ramsey has arrived at a system which is still contemporary today. All of these years, nearly 60 years later, you can still play this system. It will still give you dividends. It leaves the pitch covered. And in this case, it had England ahead of the pack, always being able to find the extra man in midfield. So it was. So this is the moment where England start to win the World Cup. And significantly, he doesn't play this again until the quarterfinal of the World Cup. He keeps it under wraps. The Spanish coach, Villalonga, he just raved about England after the game. He said there is no side on earth who could have coped with this England tonight. That doesn't necessarily mean that the players were better than the players of the other national teams, but they had a system that worked and was ahead of the pack. And Ramsey was very, very sure that he didn't want the rest of the world to have a long look at this before the World Cup. So all the other warm-up friendlies and then the 3 group games in the World Cup, Ramsey plays a winger, plays an orthodox winger. And it's only when it gets serious, the quarter-final, semi-final, the final, that he plays this system again. So Ramsey knew that he had something and he wanted to hide it until it really mattered.
This was clearly a revolution. Sadly, like Gil Scott Heron predicted, the revolution will not be televised. It's very rare. We are there at the moment of a revolution. So there ain't much of the clips from this match to be seen. Very little, maybe a minute of it on the internet. Which is a shame, obviously, but the revolution seems out of sync with, and you've already alluded to, the manager. The manager is an old school manager, a sort of Victorian era, virtually type manager of the England team, who was the least likely revolutionary in terms of football, as you've already alluded to as well. I wonder whether the revolution was specific to this particular England squad. In the way that Alf Ramsey saw it, this was already the model for the World Cup. These were the players that were going to form the key to England's World Cup victory, and this was the formation that worked for them.
But Ramsey is a strange case because, and it's very much my old man's generation. You don't give anything away. There is never ever any showing of feelings or anything like that. It just doesn't happen. And Bobby Charlton says that it's just as well that Ramsey didn't stay in the dressing room for too long after the game, because the players are euphoric. Jack Charlton is charging around and they want to hug everyone. And Bobby Charlton says, well, Ramsey, had he stayed in the dressing room, he'd probably have said, well, that's quite enough of that, chaps.
Yes.
But
yes.
So there are things going on in Ramsey's mind that he doesn't share. he's a very, very private, withdrawn person. And I've always thought, because as a player, he was very constructive, and he played in another revolutionary side, the Tottenham side that won the league in 50-51. It was the push and run side, when it was it was like Guardiola football before there was Guardiola. It was very controversial at the time, because some people thought it was not English. The England manager, Walter Winterbottom, he said he got letters from fans saying, "Don't pick any of that fancy Dan stuff. No, we just want to get it, get it in there, son." So Ramsey is, on the one hand, almost stereotypically English. He's a dyed-in-the-wool patriot. Hates everyone who's not English, I think.
Yeah, well, yeah, he could use a few saucy words when it came to the Scots, couldn't he?
Welcome to Scotland, Mr. Ramsey. You must be fucking joking. So on the one hand, he's this ultra, almost like a stereotype, but on the other, he's obviously more open-minded than you would.
Yes.
And often people have said, "Oh yeah, Ramsey won the World Cup with traditional English virtues." Bollocks, did he? The traditional English virtue was the winger. You had your Stanley Matthews figure with chalk on his boots on the touchline, and you get the ball out to him. That was traditional English virtues. He did something revolutionary. Now, he never admitted it, because it come from Johnny Foreigner, I think. But I think there's a huge influence of Brazil on his football. He toured Brazil with Southampton in the late 40s. And Brazil's already experimenting with the back four, and it's you've already seen the fullbacks begin to push up a little bit. When Brazil won the World Cup, the two previous World Cups, they were world champions at this time, 58 and 62. They've unleashed 4-2-4 and then 4-3-3 with a back four. And once you have a back four, once you have the extra defender, that pushes the fullback out wider, and it gives him space in front. So essentially, in Ramsey's teams, the fullback becomes the winger. Only he doesn't appear all the time. You leave that space vacant, and then the fullback suddenly appears in it. And England's first goal in this game, it's a free kick. George Eastham takes it, and then suddenly there's Ray Wilson, the left back. He's got acres of space, and he just puts a low cross across the face, and there's Joe Baker at the far post to turn it in. The second goal is very, very similar, only on the other flank of the field. George Cohen goes up from right back. It's not his cross. They play it in, and then Bobby Moore is the extra man in midfield arriving from deep. He plays a 1-2, and then Bobby Moore plays it across the back. I think it's Roger Hunt who turns it in at the far post. They're kind of almost like mirror things of the same move. But Ramsey, there's a lot of what Brazil were doing in his football, but he would never ever admit it. He would always say, I have faith in English players and so on. So he's an unlikely, quiet revolutionary. But sometimes the most dramatic things happen from people of whom you would least expect it.
In that 4-4-2 formation, then, I can see the role of the fullbacks, as you say, appearing from deep, out of nowhere, unmarked virtually. They need a lot of pace, though, to get up and down the pitch, as Kyle Walker, for example, would be the obvious example, perhaps in the England team today. Yeah. But what's the role of the midfielders in that 4-4-2 formation? And particularly, I was thinking in terms of creating space for the two centre forwards, but also pulling the opposition players away from, where the crosses are going to come in from, for example.
Yeah, so Nobby Stiles is the holder. He's protecting the two centre backs, and this is Jack Charlton, one of his first games, and Bobby Moore. It's the World Cup defence there. And you're absolutely right there. The pace of the fullbacks was very, very important to Ramsey. Cohen wasn't a great player at right back, and there was always the line that he played for Fulham. There was always the line that George Cohen hit more photographers than Frank Sinatra. That's where his crosses went,
I'm thinking of Frank Sinatra, obviously, rather than his crosses.
Ramsey did it his way. That's his defensive protection. And if no one dives in, then that's hard to penetrate. That's hard to get through. So then what he's got with Ball is he's got two players in one, because Ball can go out wide and be the winger if you want him to.
Yeah,
And as he
yeah,
did
as
in
he did
the
for Everton.
famous goal that may not have been a goal in the final in '66 from Jeff Hurst, it's Alan Ball getting to the line and crossing. So Ball he can be the winger, but he can also play inside and just make that extra man, because that's a lot of what football is about. Ball, see, I see Ball as a kind of right-footed version of Mario Zagallo, who played he played on the left wing for Brazil in '58 and '62, and was the coach in '70. And he did that double role. He was the winger, but he would also come back and mark, and come back and tuck inside and be part of the team in possession. And Zagallo, and I was fortunate enough to go in depth with on him with this. And a point that Zagallo made is football is maths. From the point that the opposition have a back four, then you must be able to outnumber them elsewhere on the field, because they got 4 players at the back. So you must be able to create. If you distribute your players intelligently, you must be able to create a 2 against 1 situation anywhere on the field outside the penalty area. And that's one of the things that Ball would do as well, because he comes into the middle. The fullback doesn't is the fullback going to follow him and leave that flank, leave that space open? Well, probably not. So you've got an extra man there. So Ball is both a central midfielder and a winger. You've got a player, as they said of Zagallo, you've got to play with 2 shirts. George Eastham is doing a similar thing on the left, although I don't think he was quite as versatile. And that's one of the reasons he was still in the squad come the World Cup 6 months later, but he lost his place to Martin Peters, who was more versatile, did things quicker as well. I think George Eastham was very classy, but Martin Peters did those things quicker. So you've got it is remarkably flexible, and you see one of the heights of this team that Ramsey creates is when they play Brazil in 1970 in that World Cup. It's the same team really. He's made a shift here and there, but it's essentially the same team. And I don't know what the possession statistics are of that game, but I would guess that England had more possession than Brazil. Brazil 1970, because England had worked out how to create the extra man in midfield. And it really was revolutionary, and I don't think it's ever quite been given the credit that it deserves. It's a step on the way to then what Ajax did in the 70s with the total football, where anyone can crop up in any position as long as you keep the structure of the side. But I think what England were doing with this kind of 4-4-2 thing was a step on the way. You can almost see it in production terms. You make your players more productive because they all have more than one. Most of them have more than one role. Now, that's not true of, say, Gordon Banks. He's the goalkeeper. It's not true of Jack Charlton. He's there to head the ball away and kick the ball away and stop other people from playing. But everyone else is going to contribute in different ways, both with and without the ball. I think that was key to this side that Ramsey created.
Yeah, he perhaps doesn't get the credit for it. It's arguably the same formation, isn't it, that Mario Zagallo won the World Cup 4 years later with Brazil.
Yeah, that they tweaked it even a little bit more. It was more like a 4-2-3-1. What they did, they didn't play 2 right up front as England played with this night with Hunt and Jimmy Greaves is out with hepatitis. That's why he's not playing. He didn't completely recover, as he would say himself. Brazil went a step further in 1970 and played Pelé off Tostão. And the vital game in that, one of the vital games in that Brazil campaign is when they beat Peru, and Peru having a comeback. And the fellow who comes back and wins the ball, I think in the Brazil half, is Pelé. So they've taken it one step further. They've got one of their strikers coming back and helping out in the midfield block. And Zagallo was quite happy to see that team as a forerunner of kind of modern day 4-5-1. But there are similarities. Obviously, there are massive differences as well. And the difference is the individual talent of the players. You know, the Brazilians can do things with the ball that this England team can't. But if you're creating 2 against 1 situations, you don't necessarily have to be a genius. You know, you just have to wait the pass and give the right pass at the right time. And so a good team that operates like that doesn't necessarily have to be full of individual genius. If you're creating 2-against-1 situations through your formation, then, and this was a great lesson of Hungary. This was the lesson that Malcolm Allison took from being at Wembley in '53 when Hungary beat us 6-3. So the Hungarians, they're good players, but they're not that much better. It's just that the way that they're playing, their formation means that they are creating 2-against-1 situations close to our goal. So that's the way that the tactical organisation of the side helps the individual player to be better because you're giving him the ball in space. And this is what England were able to do, creating the extra man against Spain and playing through Spain with an ease that left the Spanish perplexed.
And why do you think the 4-4-2 formation has been so durable?
Because it leaves the pitch covered. You've got all sections of the pitch covered. So I think for that reason, it's probably been the most successful formation in football. And these days, it can be used very, very well if you want to play conservatively, because you've got those. As long as, and this was a hole that English football fell into after the Ramsey thing. We stopped having any depth in that midfield. We just had a straight line of 4, and that wasn't the way that England played. Styles is there as the gatekeeper, and English football kind of forgot that, I think, for a while. I mean, if you look at the success that Eric Cantona had in English football, much more success he did in English football than when he was playing in Europe for Man United. It's because he just stood in the lines between and there was no one marking him. It's a similar thing with Nigel Clough, who was slow, and as soon as sides worked that out and had a defensive midfielder in front of the back 4 to close down his space, Nigel Clough was much less effective because that was his space. It's strange how sometimes things get forgotten. As we did a podcast recently about Greece winning the Euros in 2004, and they turned the clock back with a system of man marking, and the opposition had kind of forgotten how to deal with it. It was something that was absolutely normal a few decades ago. Probably started to die out when Celtic beat Inter Milan in that European final in '67, when Celtic had their men coming from the back and beating the man-for-man marking system. But sides had forgotten how to play against it, and so Greece, temporarily at least for the duration of that tournament, they had an advantage. And for a time, I think English football forgot some of the lessons and didn't have any depth in the midfield, and just had that 4 in a straight line and loads of space in front.
And how about talking of how you sort of manage the old school formation, man marking, etc. What about when 4-4-2 is deployed, but you're out of possession? What's the purpose then of the formation, or how does the formation adjust? You've told us how it works going forward, but how about when it's coming the other way, when you're out of
Well,
possession? How does that cover the space
yeah, because
that you want?
it leaves you with those 2 lines of 4. So you've got all of that space across the field is covered. So when the opposition have the ball on your right, you can bring across there. You can leave the space on your left, and if they do the big switch, then you just move over again. So I think that's the basic advantage of the system. It just leaves, and George Cohen always used to say this, the right back, and he said, we learnt with defending this way that if no one sold themselves, then we were really, really hard to play through. And it's it's a basic way to set out your side that you can still do today. And Ramsey was so far ahead of the curve because he had arrived at the point that the winger who just stays hugging the touchline can be a luxury player. Obviously, things come around again. Wingers have come back.
Yeah. And maybe Bobby Charlton was right, because it is more like 4-3-3 nowadays, isn't it? That seemed to be the dynamic way of moving forward on the pitch. 4-4-2 does sometimes feel a little bit old school, but nevertheless, it is probably still the most.
And maybe wingers have
Um,
come back exactly because with that line of four, as we're saying, if no one sells himself, it's hard to get through. So
yeah,
what's the thing that beats this? If you can dribble, if you can dribble in the right space, and if you can take one of those defenders out of the equation, then you've got a chance. So I think that's why, and also with football now is quite compact. The sides are quite compact. So if you can dribble and suddenly take two out of the game, fantastic. You've opened up holes.
especially in a tournament, where in Euro season at the moment, you do have to stay very compact. Um, in a sort of knockout tournament, well, in a tournament where every game will feel like a knockout for some of those group stages as well, you do have to stay very compact and wait for your opportunities. And I suppose 4-4-2 allows you to be flexible in that way, widen the pitch quite a lot, protect yourselves as well quite a lot, but also have that opportunity to break from defence
Yeah, and
and to
if you look, so the last World Cup, some of the last World Cups, Spain, who are a possession-based team, looking to create
yeah
the extra man in midfield, in some of the big games, how hard they've found to play their way through. Really hard. The opposition just stays there with its two banks of four, can't play through them.
yeah
Hence the
yeah.
fact that when teams are able to defend us, and without conceding a lot of free kicks either. No, they're
But
just able.
why did it take people so long to work that out with the Spanish team? Because they had like 12 years of tippy tapping
Oh,
around,
true,
the
true.
banks of midfield or defence. I don't understand why when 4-4-2 was out there I suppose in retrospect you always see it slightly differently, don't you? Um, do you, do you think also that in terms of like a tournament like we have currently, the 4-4-2 is not somewhat a bit of a luxury having the two centre forwards up front. Now, if you can get away with it, you will bank five in the midfield, won't you? And
Yeah.
just play one up front and hoping maybe one or maybe sometimes two of those bank of five midfielders will be able to play in that false nine position and
Mm.
move forward or in a 10 position. Do you not think that having two, and this is an old school English way of playing football? I remember for me, even our Subbuteo days, but having two centre forwards is not a bit of a luxury in a tournament.
Yeah, and it's interesting why Ramsey stuck with two centre forwards. I know it ended up in the World Cup being Jeff Hurst with Roger Hunt, and Greaves lost his place during the first, got injured, and then couldn't get back in. And I think the reason for that was they were there in part to set play up for Bobby Charlton. And the side is built around Bobby Charlton. And Ramsey said if he didn't have Bobby Charlton, he'd have to go about things in an entirely different way. The system gives a platform for Bobby Charlton. So one of the things he's looking for his strikers is running, opening up space, and then Charlton arriving at the end of at the edge of the area. When the World Cup semi-final against Portugal shows this perfectly. You play it long to one of the strikers, and they half clear, and there's Charlton emerging the edge of the area to score his goal. So he was seeing his strikers as much creators as finishers. Now, the idea was Charlton was everything is built around in possession, getting Charlton in space close enough to goal to shoot. So it's a different conception of strikers that Ramsey has as well. You're not just trying to get goals from the strikers; it's the strikers creating for your main attacking player, who's Bobby Charlton.
Well, we talked of a revolution, and this revolution, December 1965, is only part of the revolution. The keen,
Just.
uh, yes, indeed, the keenly knowledgeable amongst you will know that 65, are we not on the edge of that swinging 60s revolution? Yeah, we're on the edge of it. I don't think it's fully arrived yet, Tim. Looking at the charts of the day, the
It, it,
swinging 60s are a
it's it,
heartbeat or two away.
it's such a rich comparison, isn't it, between the old world and the new. It's really stunning. I think this chart, really fascinating chart.
It is. There's a lot to talk about. So let's kick off at number one. The carnival is over. And you could look at that as, or you could read that or hear it as a metaphor. It's by the Seekers, like the original Seekers before the new ones tried to teach the world to sing. How do you read it? It's a haunting tune, a very sad tune in many
Yeah,
ways.
I
Lots of
don't actually
minor
like it,
chords,
but
etc.
they did
Yeah,
they did some kind of swinging '60s kind of stuff, didn't they? And Hey There, Georgie Girl is one of theirs. It's a very very traditional ballad. It's well sung, but it sounds as if they've almost taken a step backward into light entertainment, which I also feel about the number 4 record, Cliff Richard.
yeah. What I was going to say, indeed, shocking for me to hear him do what is obvious copy, rip-off of a really classic love song that was initially written in the early 1950s and was one of those cowboy country songs that Engelbert Humperdinck got to number one. Please release me, let me go. Here it's wind me up, let me go. This is a wind up, isn't it?
Well, it's Cliff is seeing his career, I imagine, along the lines that Elvis saw his career.
Yes, and Tommy Steele saw his
And
career as
Tommy Steele,
well.
yeah, you're right, because that was the path, wasn't it? That was the path. You make your breakthrough as a kind of rebellious figure, and then you age with your audience a little bit by going into more schmaltzy light entertainment and throwaway movies, throwaway films, and that's the path. And it only looks to our eyes ludicrously antiquated because of what else is going on.
Yeah, indeed. Well, one thing that's going on politically at the time is a Race Relations Act. So this is 1965. You were talking about December 1965. By then, I was experiencing my first season of snow here, and I remember it very well. I remember
Did a cowboy
1960.
suit protect you against inclement weather?
No, not the cowboy suit, but I do remember getting a pair of moccasins, and because where we lived in Golders Green, we rented the ground floor there. Where we lived in Golders Green on Halswell Road, 21 Halswell Road, London NW11, if you know that one. There was a slight slope from the front door to the pavement, so we used the moccasins as to. I couldn't tell the difference between moccasins and toboggans that you'd read about. I didn't know what a toboggan was, but it sounded like moccasins to me. So we slid down, me and my brother, down that path and enjoyed our first winter in Britain. And I don't remember feeling cold at all, playing with the snow and chucking the snow at each other and whatnot. But little did we know that just about this time, a little thing called the Race Relations Act was being passed in Parliament, ostensibly, I suppose, to lay the landscape for us, new immigrants or post-war immigrants in Britain who'd had pretty much a hard time since the Windrush came over in 1948, although I wasn't, aware of anything like that at the age of 6, as I was at this point. But I do remember very clearly, the positivity that I felt at the age of 6. By December, I think I'd stopped crying for home in Nigeria. And I hadn't started speaking Cockney just yet because we went to a school in not a posh area, but it wasn't a proper Cockney area.
Did you speak
That
with a
that was
Nigerian
yet to
accent
come.
then?
I think I must have.
You must have,
There's
yeah.
no memory of that. I think I must have. I don't think that you lose that overnight, but I imagine by December, so by December 1965, I'd have been here exactly 3, 4 months, exactly, I'd say. But by this point, yeah, 3 months, let's say. September, October, November. Yeah, 3 months. And I think I must have had an accent. I can't believe it switched straight away, but it definitely wasn't a Cockney accent until we moved to bizarrely South London rather than East London. But that's another story in itself. But yeah, I have really fond memories. It was summer when we arrived, so it was sunny days, which wouldn't have been far away from where we had come from. And then it switched. I can't remember the autumn, the first autumn, but I do remember the winter just because of tobogganing with moccasins down that slope that I told you about. Yeah. But let's be real. There were challenges for our parents and so on in this
It's
country.
something of a double-edged sword. This is because this is the first. This is pioneering race relations legislation. So that's on the one hand, but on the other hand, the legislation which is about immigration is tightening up, and it's clearly tightening up on race grounds. Now,
Yes, indeed,
the
because it's
election the previous year,
Commonwealth.
yeah,
Yes, it's Commonwealth immigration that they're citing. So, they're not talking about immigration from Europe or anything like that at this point. But on reflection, do you not think that the way that the Labour government under Harold Wilson was able to pass some of these race relations acts to protect new immigrants, the way that he was able to pass them through was to say, okay, to the those who would have been opposed to that, to say, look, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a little sort of
yeah.
lump of sugar by saying we'll cut down on Commonwealth immigration, which they subsequently did. And I think, as a consequence, I'll tell you one thing that I've thought about so much around this issue. So the statistics shows that by the 1970s, immigration into this country from the Caribbean had almost stopped completely because of the difficulty in coming over here. Whereas in America, closer to the Caribbean is where people are going. America, North America, and Canada. My experience of the Caribbean community in America, I'm not saying all of them, I don't know all of them, is that they're very hardworking and very successful community on the
Yeah.
whole. It's like some people might say of, I don't know, the Southeast Asian community or the South Asian community. Yeah, you make a generalization. Yeah, generally you regard them, they're seen as hardworking and successful. It's a little bit like that. And I wonder if we didn't lose something here. Obviously you make your political decisions for the times that you're in, but the consequences of that is that America has got, I mean, in music, which is the department I know, half of those great rappers have got Jamaican roots or Bajan roots or, whatever it might be. And they're in America. They're making money for America, not for us.
The contribution of all of it is massive, isn't it? Really, really massive, and people often overlook it. I mean, even fish and chips. That's the waves of Jewish immigrants. It always changes the culture and always adds to the culture. What do you think it was like for your dad? The experience of uprooting.
Well, I will be honest. I've seen his diary from around this time, and I think it wasn't diagnosed, but I think he had a breakdown of a sort. To be honest, yeah, that's the real price of experiencing racism for the first time, because you come from a country where you've just never heard of it, you've never experienced it, because what was the need? There was no need for any racism. It was an absurd concept within an African landscape, and as opposed to a Caribbean landscape, by the way, because obviously
Yeah, yeah.
in an African landscape, uh, the vast majority were black, whereas in the Caribbean landscape there was a different relationship between
Well,
black
it's all
people
the
and white
legacy of
people.
enslavement there.
Yeah,
Anyway,
exactly.
Africa is different.
Yeah, in that respect. So they never really experienced it before, and they came over here, and I
Yeah.
don't think he could quite believe what hit him. And I think he had a breakdown, and I think he developed more mental illness whilst he was here over the time. Of course, you wouldn't have known because ostensibly he was a middle class person, albeit living in very challenging circumstances. But the middle classes have ways of sort of getting through these things without it becoming debilitating, maybe. And not just the middle classes, working class people do, but I think they have a different way of displaying it or hiding it. Anyway, yeah, I think it really challenged him. But once you make the kind of commitments that those immigrants made, which was kind of a difficult commitment to leave your comfort zone, your home country, your family, and everything else, you can't just come back with your tail between your legs and say, "Well,
No,
what a mistake
no,
I
can't
made."
do it. Can't do it.
And
Yeah,
you commit yourself
yeah.
to this. So and your children are over here now. What are you going to do? Rip them out of schools and
Mhm.
take them to a place that they barely remember at all, and so on. So it's a complicated one, that one, man. It's a really complicated one. But life is what you make of it, and you can't look back and say, "Oh, woe were we," in that it's kind of okay, woe were you, but now what are you going to do? Everybody goes through some kind of challenges in their lives, and then you got to pick yourself up. And there's positive tunes. Going back to the charts, there are positive tunes in this charts as well. The Carnival is Over is the
But
number
there's
one
one just
tune.
to to carry on the link with Africa, because what it's not in the chart, but it's been released at this time, and that's James Brown. Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, which is a
Oh,
revolutionary.
right.
It's a revolutionary record, isn't it?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
James
yeah.
Brown's been around for a decade at least, and what he's done with this record, he's done away with the tyranny of the chord change. It's a band grand. It's a brand. His brand new bag is the groove, and this is the records that he did for the next few years. One of the kind of headlines that they got was, this is James Brown in a jungle groove. Do you feel Africa in this part of James Brown's output?
Well, you've got to. You've got to, and I love the way that you described the tyranny of the chord change. We'll come back to that. You've got to. I'll tell you why you've got to, because this is exactly what Fela Kuti took to create the first, I suppose, international sound of Africa from Nigeria, at least, with his Afro beat, rather than Afro beats, as something slightly different is described as today. He is basically mimicking James Brown, but what he has found, you can't just go from Africa to James Brown. He did go and live in the States for a while and absorbed a lot of the sort of Black Power movement at the time and the cultural expression of Black Power, which James Brown is actually at the very center of. And a tune like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, which is more kind of, I think the difference between this and the James Brown that you've heard before is that there's a lot more. This is a lot more speculative in that what's the word I'm looking for? It's more of a like a jam, this
It's a
is more
groove.
of a
It's a
freestyle. It's a
groove. Yeah.
freestyle. Yeah, it's more of a freestyle is what I was looking for. But anyway, um, underneath that groove, there's something that connects Fela Kuti and African music to the sound of North America, funk, soul, whatever you want to call it. And that is what Fela took from this and amalgamated it uh, with what was his, because Fela started out in a group called the Cola Libitos or the Cooler Libitos. It was either the Cola Libitos or the Cooler Libitos. I'm sorry that I've forgotten that. But anyway, when you hear him, this is when Fela was studying at Trinity School of Music in London. He had gone to London to study medicine. His father had sent him there to study, but he loved the music, etc. Anyway, he had this sort of, and I'm going to write about this one day actually, because this is my father's
Hmm.
generation. When they came over here, just you were asking about how they found it. Well, they found their own little tribes and their own little communities of people from, let's say, Lagos or wherever, and they found a way to navigate the landscape here through the connection. So, for example, if you wanted your music from back home, well, there was a group called the Kula Libitos who were willing to perform that music for you. They were putting out records, which were essentially High Life records, which was the popular soundtrack of West Africa at the time, out of Ghana, but Nigeria had its own kind of high life, and that was the Kula Libitos. Then he goes to America for a while, discovers Black Power, discovers an American woman as well with a big afro, Sandra, and discovers James Brown. And, the art or the synergy of the art comes in that you're hearing something in James Brown that you can feel. It's like football. When you bring culturally, when you bring a formation, as we've been talking about, 4-4-2 to one culture, it works because, for example, you need your tall centre forwards, don't you? You can't have little short geezers running around on a 4-4-2 formation, for example. So there are some cultural limitations, but when they amalgamate and synchronize in the way that they've done between Fella and James Brown, then that they're connected culturally. So if that answers your question in a very long-winded way,
It
I
does.
hope it does.
It's given me a thirst for knowledge, and I want you to write about this because I want to learn more about it. But the fascinating thing about it is like boundaries are being pushed in all kinds of direction. It's Bob Dylan, Positively 4th Street. It's kind of a retread of like a Rolling Stone.
Yep, yep,
But
yep,
you're what you're getting is a lyrical palette that goes beyond love stories.
yep,
You've
yep.
got the Who with My Generation and the Animals, It's My Life.
Well, the Beatles at number 2 with
Yeah,
We Can Work It
yeah,
Out. Forget Day Tripper, forget that, but
no,
We Can Work It Out.
I think Day Tripper is the one to focus on because it's the more
Oh, no.
revolutionary.
Go on then. Yeah, go on,
Well,
focus on it.
I don't know if you've ever come across it. It's a fabulous book by Steve Turner called The Beatles 1966. And
No.
it's Steve Turner was a veteran music journal of the 60s. And it goes through month by month because this is the year where the Beatles just change everything. And the book starts with exactly this moment, December 65. They're doing their last UK tour. And it's just so laughably small scale. They're driving around in cars, they're staying in crummy little hotels, and they're playing small venues. I would have loved to have been there. But
Yeah,
while they're
yeah.
doing this, they've reached a point where they have written songs that say, I love you in
Yeah.
every possible manner. So they've got to take it forward. They have to take it forward. And they are totally aware and they are totally convinced that what they're going to do now, they have to come up with a kind of popular music that doesn't exist. They have to invent it. Just as James Brown's being revolutionary in one way, they're going to be revolutionary in another. And they are convinced that a consequence of this is going to be that they are going to lose a significant part of their audience. All right, now we had a good run, but now we got to move on. We're artists, and it's fascinating how important Macca was to this process because Macca's living in the centre of London. Lennon's on his own in the Surrey countryside, taking drugs and going quietly mad at times. But Macca is going to lectures and he's meeting people. He's with all of these countercultural figures. He's really is a driving force, Macca. Although it's Lennon who comes up with Day Tripper. So what are they going to go? How are they going to take it forward? They're a little bit confused and they have to kind of find their way themselves. And one of the things that they come up with is humour. Baby, you can drive my car. I've got no car
Right.
and it's breaking my heart, but I've got a driver and that's the start. Norwegian Wood, which is a kind of
yeah. Play on
and
words.
Day Tripper, where the original lyric, that obviously can't record is "She's a prick teaser,"
Yeah,
So, and
I see. I always thought it was about drugs, Day Tripper. I just thought, forget it.
It possibly is, but
Yeah.
it seems to be a condemnation of someone who's a weekend hippie.
Yeah,
But hippies didn't exist. The word didn't exist. You
No,
know,
sure.
it's
To
possible.
67
One
maybe?
yeah, between
About that,
66 and
yeah.
67. One possible interpretation is this is Lennon having a go at McCartney for not
Well,
embarking on the drugs thing,
yeah.
because he was the latest to come to all of this. And we're just a few months away. I think it was the first track that they recorded for
Yeah.
Revolver, which is Tomorrow Never Knows. Now, Tomorrow Never
Mhm.
Knows now sounds freaky. What it must have sounded like then. And Tomorrow Never Knows
Fair point.
brings the drone back into Western music. The drone hadn't been in Western music for centuries, with the exception of bagpipes. And Tomorrow Never Knows brings it back. You know, that kind of Eastern thing, the drone. Uh,
Mm.
so they're pushing this, and this record, Day Tripper, and We Can Work It Out. It comes into the charts at number 2, not at number 1. Oh, it's all over. It's all over. Beatlemania is all over. It's all over. And that's
Well, it
the
is. It
that's the way
is,
that
isn't
people
it?
thought then, that
Yeah.
people obviously you can't see the future. And they
Yeah,
don't
no.
know that the Beatles are going to take this off into areas that no one has imagined. So you're seeing all these frontiers being pushed. You know, the Animals and the Who doing kind of generational acts of
Yeah.
generational rebellion. Um,
Yeah.
all these boundaries being pushed, and in other areas as well. And one kind of lightweight singer, Chris Andrews, who's in the
Yeah.
charts
Well,
with
I'm coming to the, oh my
Bluebeat.
god, you go on,
Bluebeat,
yeah,
take it
exactly.
away.
Exactly. Well, I remember the song from even when I was a kid, like from when I was
What,
maybe 8,
Yesterday's
9 or
Man?
10 years ago. Yeah, yeah. Because
Yeah,
it was still going strong at that point. And this is what we called reggae at the time. It
yeah,
is reggae. It is, yeah, blue beat, as you say, or rock steady. It is. And it kind of leads the way into a whole generation of reggae songs that skinheads were into, all the sort of like Greyhound, you know, the world is black. The way it even precedes, I'm pretty sure, the Beatles' Obla Di Obla Da,
right,
which
right.
was their reggae hit. So here you got a white guy already realizing, I mean, this is the only sort of nod to the Race Relations Act
Yeah.
at all that I can stretch a connection with in the charts. But you got a
Spencer
white guy
Davis.
singing.
Spencer Davis, keep on
Well, I'm
running.
coming to that
Stevie
as
Winwood.
well because, well, remember I was in the studio with Stevie Winwood just a few weeks ago,
You're
a couple of
joking.
times. No, I'm
No,
not joking. You don't know that.
no, you didn't
You
tell me
don't
this.
know that. No, this. I've been to Stevie Winwood's farm where he's got a studio that my missus has been recording in and mixing in of late. Um, Twice now in the last few weeks. So Stevie Winwood bought this amazing farm out in near Cheltenham. All the land, as far as you can see, is his farm. All the land, as far as you can see, and then he's got this baronial sort of farmhouse on the one side, and then although he's moved out of there now into what they call a cottage, but the cottage is probably bigger than 2 or 3 or 4 of the houses that I'm living in right now. And yeah, that baronial one, it's got this vast sort of ancient kind of living room area with the, you know, you can stand full height in their fireplace kind of thing. One of those kind of, anyway, he's got these, what I suppose were stables at one point, but they've converted them into some studios amongst other things. So my missus recorded some jazz stuff there, and you've got to be one of the chosen ones to come and use his studio. Not anybody can just walk in and use it. They
Oh,
got to
no, no.
like your stuff.
Yeah.
So Stevie came over. He's 76 years old now, but he bought this gaff when he was 19. You see, he used his money and his sense wisely. And he came over to talk to the missus and to, you know, wish her well and how much he was enjoying the music she was doing. So I had a chinwag with him as well. Yeah. Stevie Winwood,
Can
mate.
you ask him a question next time that
You go on.
I'm too scared to ask him, so you're gonna have to do this.
Okay, go on.
Well, because I think I'm a man. Well, Spencer Davis Group. I think
Yes.
he's just fucking unreal on that track. It's an unbelievable track. Just
Yeah.
the attack on it. I just think it's unreal. And sometimes it frustrates me that because he always comes across as really laid back.
He is.
Yeah,
He's a
and
sort of classic English gentleman now, I would
there's that
say.
fire that
Yeah.
you hear in "I'm a Man," and so my question would be, couldn't you have done more stuff like that, man?
Well, he kind of did. You know, like you were saying about the Beatles, remember, he reinvented himself twice, and each time he was huge. He went on from Stevie Winwood to Traffic, as you know, and then was it wasn't Humble Pie, was it? It was
No, Steve Marriott.
what was yeah, no, sure. What was Stevie Winwood's one? I'll find out for you in a moment. So, and he went from like doing the kind of bluesy tunes, Spencer Davis group tunes, like "Keep on Running," which is in the charts you're alluding to, and he went on from that to then doing a sort of more heavy rock stuff with Traffic, and then this sort of stadium rock thing with the third group that I can't even remember
Yeah,
now.
it's
But
such a waste
you
of
know,
talent. Stadium and rock are two words that should never go together. I want more stuff
well,
like I'm a Man,
no,
please, Stevie.
no,
Please.
well,
I
yeah,
know you can do
yeah,
it.
yeah. But I'm sure you can. It's Blind Faith, wasn't it?
That's
Was the
right.
other
Yeah,
group
yeah.
Blind Faith? But mate, it's you got to move with the times as well, and you've got to let artists
Bollocks.
be
Bollocks.
who. You've got to
Yeah.
let
Yeah,
artists
you have.
be
You have.
who they are. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, artists are a
Right.
unique animal. I mean, I know you're teasing him. I'm not going to ask him in the way that you asked him, but I
No.
will say
No, you're
to,
gonna do it
I'll say
diplomatically.
to, yeah, I'll say I've got this mate of mine who knows absolutely nothing about music. Yeah, but he loves your I'm a Man, and he thinks you should have done
It's
more
got a
of that.
line like, "And my toilet's made of chrome."
Why not? Why not? I didn't know that.
It's true.
I'll tell him that's your favorite line as well, but I'll stay nevertheless at a distance before I mention that to him. But yeah, music wise though, the charts. Yeah, Spencer Davis Group, "Get Off My Cloud" by the Rolling Stones
Oh,
at
"Get
number
Off My
9 is
Cloud"
another
by the
great.
Rolling
And
Stones.
this is the only
Heaven.
chart. This is the only chart you will ever see where the comedian Ken Dodd has got two tracks, not one, but two tracks in the top 10. At
He
number
he's he's
7, The
he's
River.
ridden the Mersey beat thing, isn't he? So you
Well,
suddenly being from
no,
Liverpool
actually.
is like an advantage.
Exactly. That part of it is an advantage. But what he's done is go back a generation to the crooners. So what he's doing on both Tears, which is at number 8, and The River, which is number 7, not the River Merseyside. This is some old school river business. What he's done there is go back to the days of pre-rock and roll even, let alone pre-Mersey beat. He's gone back to the days of the early 50s with all the crooning. He could be Frankie Lane or one of those guys on this, as indeed Gene Pitney is, with a shocking track, "Princess in Rags" at number 10. What do you think?
No, not good at all.
Yeah.
Like PJ
Uh,
Proby with Maria, it just sounds
well, I'll tell you,
so
it's
dated.
shocking. I know. Well, PJ Proby was an American who came over, one of these Americans
The
that found more fame.
splitting PJ Proby.
Exactly, exactly. This is the point I was trying to make. So here he is trying to make out like I'm a serious artist. He quickly ditched that when he realized after his trousers accidentally split on stage that, hang on, I could be a real artist with a sense of humor. You remember you were talking about the Beatles with a sense of humor. I kind of disagree with you that this is where they start their sense of humor. Because what I think is they've always had the humor there. I don't think they were serious when they were singing "She Loves You," yeah, yeah, yeah. They had a sense of humor when they let Ringo do "Words of Love," for example, by Buddy Holly. They've got a sense of humor. He's playing a cardboard box on it. He's not playing the drums. He's playing a cardboard flipping box on it. So they've always had a sense of humor. PJ Proby only found his sense of humor after trying to be serious, sometimes with pop. You look a little bit like Elvis, but you're not Elvis. So the bits of PJ
Tell me
Proby's
why.
face. Sorry?
Tell me why.
Well, sometimes, as every
No,
filmmaker knows.
that's a half joke because Elvis is in the charts
Oh,
with "Tell
right.
Me Why."
Oh, I've got. Of course. It's not a bad joke now that you've explained it. Don't try and be too clever by half, though. What do you think? Elvis is in the charts at number 17 with "Tell Me Why," but at number 18 is, I think, the killer tune of this charts, actually, Fontella Bass with "Rescue Me."
It's
What do you
fucking
think?
wonderful. It's wonderful. This
Yeah.
is the year that Motown has a big breakthrough in England. There's a Motown special with Dusty Springfield on "Ready Steady Go."
Uh-huh.
So it's Wilson Pickett's in the charts.
Well, Roy Orbison's at number
Yeah,
22.
the Big O.
Given
That's a dull ballad, isn't it? The Big O.
But I'll tell you why this is interesting. But given what you said about the Beatles, Day Tripper, "We Can Work It Out," have a listen, particularly on "We Can Work It Out," to George Harrison's guitar. That is a flipping Roy Orbison. In
Yeah,
fact, I
it's
think the
yeah, Big
melody
O.
is still
Big O.
straight out of Roy Orbison. So he comes back as a result of the Beatles using his guitar licks. That ain't bad. thankfully, we don't have to talk about How Can You Tell by Sandy Shaw. Let's put it this way. She realizes that her voice isn't the greatest, so she's gone down the humor route for this one.
Talking of Motown, the Toys, an American black
Yes,
vocal group,
yes,
Lovers
yes,
Concerto, and that's
yes.
such a freaky idea.
It's a
You get a
northern
little,
soul, I think you'd call it
well,
nowadays,
yeah,
wouldn't you?
but it's back
Yeah, yeah,
with a Motown, but that was the idea of the song. Let's get a back piece of music from back and give it a Motown bass line and
yeah.
see what happens. And they came out with Lovers Concerto.
You call it back, I call him Bark.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I call him Johann Sebastian when we're hanging
yeah,
out
well,
together.
good. Yeah. Flipping out. I didn't realize you were that old, but hey, let's move on swiftly. And also, I think we need to give a little bit of a shout out as well to Tony Bennett with the re-entry, I suppose,
My
Lost My Heart in San
heart
Francisco. Or is this the
in
original?
San
I'm saying
Francisco. I don't know.
it's a I think it's a re-entry in this charts, but I think it is from that era. So it's the original of his version. I think I Lost My Heart in San Francisco. But apart from that, yeah, half decent, interesting
It's
charts.
fantastic, and it's a time where, and what links the whole thing together, I think, is both in football and in music and in fashion and culture. Our little island is like leading the world. It's amazing,
It's just about to. It's just about to lead the
Yeah,
world, isn't it? It
yeah,
hasn't quite done it yet, but it's just about to, football-wise, musical-wise, cultural-wise, and even race relations-wise. Because whatever you say about the Race Relations Act here, you've got to say none of the other countries have got it. None
yeah.
of the other countries have got it. Yeah.
I remember studying politics of race in college. I'd never been out of England, and I was just amazed how ahead England was or Britain was in many of these things. I hadn't realised. So just like a
I
fantastic time to be alive, even
yeah.
if I was only like 6 months at the time, and
Yeah.
you were still going around
Well,
in your cowboy
well,
suit in the snow.
yes. I had a big grey beard at that point. Obviously, as you know, you're only 6 months old. Yeah, you use that as much as you can because it's not always youth, but wisdom that is more important.
Mhm.
Sometimes just thought I'd throw that in for
The
free.
older I get, the
Ma-
more I agree with you. Mhm.
Yes, the less young I get, the less I agree with myself. So, 8th of December 1965 was the game we'll be talking about. England versus Spain. The revolution that was 442 was born on that occasion, at least from Tim's perspective. I'm sure there'll be one or two others who say, no, 442 was before that. But this is the point where we're seeing it ahead of the World Cup in 1966, which England go on to win. Yeah, brilliant. Tim, thank you.